Well, welcome everyone to the 44th Permaculture Masterclass. I can't believe for the last 44 months we've been hosting these free monthly permaculture conversations, exploring a whole range of different topics. My name's Morag Gamble from the Permaculture Education Institute, and it's my absolute pleasure to be welcoming a wonderful group of people here to this conversation. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm seated here on the land of the Gubbi people. I'm based here at a place called Crystal Waters Permaculture Village, and I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and really recognise the deep care and love for this land over millennia. I feel so blessed to be living in this country on the banks of the Mookaboolra River. One of the things we like to do in these sessions with the Permaculture Education Institute is to drop in the chat. And if you haven't found the chat, it's down the bottom, where you're calling in from and what country you're calling in from as well. So this session, I have today three wonderful people joining me to have a yarn about, sorry, I'll just let people in. So I'm just going to let Stacey, where are you? I'm going to let Stacey be the co-host, and then she can let people in for us. Hang on a tick. Excuse me, everybody. There we go. So we have this conversation today is all about yarning about permaculture. I had a question a while ago from a group of people, and actually all of these masterclasses that I host always emerge in response to questions that people are asking. And one of the questions was, isn't permaculture a kind of colonial thing? And they said, what about, how does it relate to Indigenous communities? And I said, well, I think the best thing to do is not ask me, but let's ask people who come from those communities. And so today we have three people joining us today. We have Dominic Chen, who's an extraordinary researcher, artist, activist, educator, who's just bought a piece of land not far from us here. And she's doing her PhD research with the intersection of, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dom, but it's like urban agriculture, art, permaculture, bush foods, and she's in the midst of that at the moment. So we're sorry we're keeping up late because I know you have so much writing and thinking to do. And so if you made a donation to this session, I would like to thank you very much because I think we raised something like, hang on a tick, there we go, $1,177, and 100% of that is going directly to a project that Dom is hosting, and she can tell us about that later. We also have Tracy Hardy here from Wattleseed Nutrition, and Tracy is, now you're going to have to correct me if I get this wrong too, because you are a registered dietitian. Is that right? Do you want to open your mic and tell me exactly what it is? Because there's a particular term.
Yeah. So I'm an accredited practicing dietitian / nutritionist. So it's a bit like a difference between a beautician and a beauty therapist. A dietitian does another extra year of placement and learning also about clinical practice.
Thank you, Tracy. So deeply into your education role. I mean, we've just actually landed from a tour, I understand, of going around running and hosting programs in many parts of Australia. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a lot about that. And we also have Jacob Birch, who is what did you describe yourself as a diehard native grains person, and or native grain diehard, I think is what
native grain nerd.
Native grain nerd. There we go. And so Jacob's work is extraordinary in terms of this space of researching the native grains. And I'm super excited to welcome all of you here today to explore this interface between permaculture and the work that you're doing through nutrition, through art, through grains, through the growing and the cultural understanding and the healing. Cultural healing is one of the things that you talked about too, Tracy. So just for everyone who's listening here today too, what I've invited panel to do today is to share a little bit of an intro, a story, and then we can open up the conversation amongst them, but then also welcome you to ask your questions in. So I'm going to be here monitoring the chat and checking in to see whether what questions are emerging and to feed them into our panel today. So it's my absolute delight to hand over the reins now to Dom, who's going to, I think you've got a couple of pictures to share. So let's just check that you can do that all right first. And yeah, well, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. It's an absolute honor to have you all here. I'm so delighted. Let me see, there was over 750 people who registered for this session today, which is extraordinary. And what it shows to me is that there's a real thirst and hunger for these types of conversations, and to be able to open up the spaces where we can host and be part of these types of conversations. So let's see how it goes today, and possibly, you know, I would hope that maybe if you're interested and if our panel's open to it, to have perhaps more conversations of this nature. So that's enough from me. Over to you, Dom.
Yeah, so Yama, hello everyone. I guess I'll go first. Everyone said I had to go first. And I love these guys enough to not argue. So yeah, I'm a Gamilaroi woman. So yeah, I'm on Jinabara country. So when I'm on Jinabara country, I listen to and respect Jinabara peoples because they know all about their country. And we'd like to, just acknowledge everyone here. Brother Jacob, Sister Tracy, just for all the work that you guys do tirelessly in community. And Morag, decades of good work. And so I'm just so honoured and really excited to be in this yarn today. I'd like to acknowledge, because I know there's a few mob listening as well, a few countrymen, I think, as well. So just shout out to everyone listening, and thank you so much, making us feel like rock stars, all these people coming along to listen. So my story, Morag probably did as good of a job explaining my PhD as I probably could. It's unraveling and I'm, quite involved at the moment. But so basically, I started a permaculture design course a couple of years ago with Morag. And I think I was only maybe 5 weeks into it and my head exploded, and all these other questions started coming up and all these other thoughts, and then kind of unfortunately left my PDC for a little while. So I've got to get back to it, but ended up doing a PhD because for me, it opened up a lot of questions. It opened up a lot of resonances, permaculture is very much, I think, based on and inspired by Indigenous knowledges and positionings in the world. So in many ways, it was this amazing kind of resonance, listening, resonance with my cultural heritage and background. But at the same time, thinking, well, this isn't culture, and where's the Indigenous voices in these spaces? And so how they kind of have dialogue. So I've been in a little bit of an offshoot of a path in that sense. So I lecture at Griffith Uni within the Bachelor of Contemporary Australian Indigenous Art. So I come at a lot of this stuff not from a science kind of head. My maths is really bad, but I think it's really important. It's a way that I can think about it in this art space too, because creative practice has been so much part of our customary ways in which we share knowledge, build relationships, connect to place, care for country. So all of this stuff is quite foundational, which I'm really enjoying sort of sitting in and unpacking. Maybe I'll share my screen. I mean, I don't want to talk too much. Just a couple of little images. Just to share. So I've been doing a lot of work. So my work is focused on urban Aboriginal food growing. And basically it's just been this big area that's been silenced. Our agricultural practices have been silenced for, the better part of 230 years. There's been, with Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu seminal book, there's been some, mob are actually doing some food practices here in this country. But for me, it hasn't extended anywhere into the urban spaces in terms of thinking and understanding and acknowledging and having voice and agency in that space, even though 81% of Aboriginal people live in urban areas. So yeah, I guess my work is just a lot of talking and yarning and connecting with people and sharing and thinking about the urban context as this sort of particular place with particular histories, government realities, physical spaces. So how we kind of, can activate, both understand and also activate urban Aboriginal food growing. So permaculture kind of sits in a, a little bit parallel or, a little bit kind of dialogue with that. This is Kieran Anderson, Quandamookaman. I've been running these sort of grow, share, yarn, like workshops that we get together and we just talk and share resources. So it's really about building community and sharing our knowledges and a lot of hands-on stuff, a lot of workshops. We're doing seed ball making here with kangaroo grass. So, it's about that way urban Aboriginal people can connect and, connect with country and learn and share in these sort of very different spaces, I guess, from where our customary knowledges have come from. I've been doing a lot of stuff within the art space too, just sort of how that dialogue of food fits within art. So I've been doing various exhibitions. So how this kind of sits in and out of the art gallery, I guess, or the institution. Doing some, community kind of based, socially engaged and relational artworks here with Quandamooka woman Libby Harbert up here on Jinnaburra country. We're doing a bunya nut ferment around bunya season. I mean, too much to share. There's this little block of land that we were very, very lucky to be able to purchase. But again, it's not my land, it's Jinnaburra country. And we're just sort of learning with it and learning how to, I guess, embed some of this research into land-based practices and learning with country and using this site as a way to kind of do that. So, lots to talk about. But don't want to take everyone's time. So that's just sort of me in I'm usually, a very, very small nutshell in a big bowl of nuts and shells.
I love that. Thank you, Dom. And there's a few questions that are starting to come through already, but I'm just keeping note of those because I think the best thing to do would be to keep the conversation flowing here at the moment. And I wonder who wants to pick up the thread from there, Tracy or Jacob, who wants to jump on in after Dom?
I can see Tracy talking, but I'll go in there because you're right. Yamaganu, Yamaga Maliago Garage. So I just hello all, and I see a few friends on here too, so I say hello to you as well. And just acknowledging that the respect everybody is showing by turning up, and we always acknowledge country, but I don't think we acknowledge each other enough. So just paying my respects to all yous for turning up on a Monday evening. Hard to get back into the swing of the work week, so appreciation there. My sort of area of passion and interest and work is in native grains. So I guess I don't really have much going on at the moment. I'm busier than I've ever been, but I don't actually have a job. How does that work? In between sort of gigs, just finished authoring the Native Grain Strategic RD&E Roadmap, so that should be published by AgriFutures in November, hopefully. So keep an eye out for that, and that's trying to articulate how we move this native grain industry forward in a way that it's led by First Nations people for equitable benefits to First Nations people, and not sort of I guess in an authentic way too. So it's not saying say mob on the coast growing something from the desert. We want the communities who own that story to be running that for themselves. So say if someone is in the native rice story, then you don't want people down south growing native rice because that belongs up north. If we're going to be doing something like native rice, how do we empower the mob up north to do it rather than sort of appropriating it, that kind of thing. But I got into permaculture like I was kind of comes from back when I was a kid, but I guess we're all into it a little bit. It's in our DNA. Like, it doesn't matter sort of what race, religion, or creed you are. Like, we all come from like that connection to like working with the earth. But yeah, no, I went overseas for a little while and spent time in places like Sardinia and got really into like just their like small scale of like family holdings. Like every family, it seemed, had their own like olive grove and their own grapes and their own almond trees and their own like fruit trees, and they kept chickens, and people we worked for kept rabbits, and they kept bees and all this kind of stuff happened. And I was like, and it was just so contenting. Like, you just was so happy with that. And then came back to Australia and was like really into permaculture, and just kept asking the question, like, like you were talking about growing things like sort of random heirloom beans or tomatoes, but where's like the fundamental food? Like, what's the stuff that's going to sustain like 7 billion people with permaculture? It's like, we're not talking about like, how do we grow cereals within the permaculture community? Or when I was into it, like, it wasn't really talking about like, how do we feed 7 billion people when majority of us are eating like rice, wheat, maize, sorghum, millet, that kind of thing. I was like, yeah, how do you do that in a more like permaculture aligned sort of way? And then the native grain thing just clicked. It's like, well, perennial grasses, why don't we grow perennial grasses to provide a food crop for us? And that just seems to align so well with permaculture. Because like I won't share this image yet. If the conversation goes that way, I'll share it. It's just some seeds, but yeah, I thought this stuff, it sits in the ground. These are perennial grasses. So some of them, like our Mitchell grass, it grows for 50 years. We know at least 50 years in the ground, putting carbon in the soil, providing habitat for 50 years. You're not having to till the soil every year. So you don't have to put pesticides or fertilizer on it. And it's just superior nutritionally. So that's what I'll show them. I'll show you the photos, but I think we'll just wait. I'll let Tracy introduce herself.
You can show the photos, brother.
There's a story that goes with it, and it's not, it'd be going too far off topic.
Okay. Thanks, Dagan. Yum, everyone. So my name's Tracy, as Morag so lovely introduced me to. I'd just like to also extend my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm presenting from, the Gubbi Gubbi Kabi Kabis peoples as well, and also extend that respect to my ancestors, the Gamilaroi people, and all of you that are participating today, because yeah, as Jacob was saying, it's Monday night, and it's like, wow, that's a pretty impressive effort. So yeah, thank you so much for being here and extending that interest. So where do I start? How do I get into permaculture? So a little bit of background. I'm an accredited practicing dietitian / nutritionist, and I also am a licensed facilitator delivering WLEs, trauma-informed, culturally informed trauma-integrated care and practice programs in Dadirri. And permaculture resonated for me, gosh, when did I talk to you, Morag? It feels like just yesterday, but I know it was quite a while ago. I participated in an intensive one that wasn't quite meeting. I had a bit of an interesting experience with someone that was talking about a particular way and who had a bit of a negative connotation about fire burning and First Nations people destroying the megafauna. And we had a really big discussion. So I turned to Morag and I was like, how do I navigate this? And so, yes, and now I'm a student of Morag as well. But like permaculture to me, for someone who works within the health space, for me to be able to fuse the best of those modern nutrition sciences and showcase our ancient First Nation sciences and knowledges, in order for that to get traction and to justify my position, I always have to find the science to do that aligns with what I'm saying. So permaculture was one of those ways. And then when I was doing the course, I was like, oh, okay, a lot of those principles were drawn from Indigenous. When I use that term, it's globally referenced, but Indigenous populations globally, including Tasmania. So I was like, okay, that's great. I love that. So I think for me, I don't know where I'm going with this. There's some opportunities, I think, within the permaculture space, but there are also points that can be used as a position to engage others in that space. Because for me, reconnecting with our, First Nations food ways and practices is not only a great way to heal our Mother Earth, because we know that our current agricultural system isn't sustainable to feed us by 2050. So food insecurity is no longer going to be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander problem. It's going to be a global issue. And so that's a good point. And these Indigenous global knowledges being drawn upon now, who care for that biodiversity and food and sustainability, I think we're on a really great turning point of change and engagement. So I was a dietitian. I deal with and understand food insecurity. I also, and within the trauma space, I also understand the healing power that comes with deepening knowledge and connection with our, Indigenous food practices and food ways, not just from our physical health, but by reconnecting with those laws. And because it's such a diversity around Australia, like it's reconnecting with those old, lawways and the politics and economic trade, etc., and also supports, I'm a big advocate for supporting more authority and autonomy and leadership within the native bushfoods and botanical space, because it has ongoing impacts on, income, which also impacts on health and well-being. So I don't know if that summarizes where I'm about, but it's all connected for me. It's hard to explain it. In my mind, it's all connected. And part of this is being able to bring those connections together.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Jacob, too. And thank you, Dom. There's a lot of threads that came up. Some of them seem to be sort of different dimensions, too, of the thread. One of the things you were talking about, Tracy, there was around this idea of food insecurity and really drawing on Indigenous, or what you call First Nations food ways, as a way to address that. And at the same time too, Jacob, you were talking about that through this idea of like, how are we going to feed 8 billion people, and really looking at the native grains. And too, Dom, you were exploring, 81% of the population of Indigenous people in Australia are in urban areas. And so the whole concept of urban foodways is something that really needs to be explored. And I wonder whether, I don't know, my first question I thought that I wanted to ask Tracy was a little bit around, can you maybe articulate a little bit more what you mean as being a foodway?
So foodways is kind of like the practices, the stories, the histories. How do I summarize that? There's actually a definition for it, but the way I look at it is like, it's the practices that we do around food. So it's not just the way it talks about how we eat food, why we eat food, the story behind the food, the way that we grow the food, the way that we monitor the food, gather the food, cook the food. It's all of those things put together. The cultural aspects behind those foods as well. That's food ways. So everyone has a food way. Every culture has a food way. Australia has a food way, but this has come specifically regarding to First Nations food ways, and also understanding the diversity of those ways amongst all of the nations across this beautiful country. So when I'm speaking, I'm just made to make sure also that I don't speak on behalf of any other, nation holder or knowledge holder in this space. I'm coming from a place of knowledge that is grounded from knowledge holders that have shared that who've been generous enough to share that with me. So if I go on to another country, like I was recently, I was on Dadirri country, I know I was talking about general publicly available foods, but as far as those cultural food ways and the stories around those foods, I always encourage participants to connect with their knowledge holders in that space. And that's part of healing that trauma that comes from colonization, dispossessing us from those. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. That's really amazing. Maybe we could pass over to Dom a question around urban foodways, and what are you seeing as the possibilities for really opening up that conversation? Where are you finding that's able to be taking you at the moment?
Yeah, because I was just thinking then when Tracy was talking too, when I think about foodways, I think about interconnection, and I think about, pan-Australian relationships that, held our people and our sovereignties together, and our kinship systems, all of the songlines and pathways that we'd walk, and how food was and is, I think, an interrelated part of that. So I'm up on Gamilaroi country, and as you know, Morag bunya season is a really, visible and visceral thing. Had a really big bumper crop beginning of last year, and mobs from all over would come to Gamilaroi country for the bunya festival. Our people, our old people, all the way down from Gamilaroi would come up, and it's quite a long walk. But what that I'm sort of doing a little bit of work around this at the moment, and really grounding food and food sharing as interconnected with our kinships and our connections. So when I think about foodways, I think about that, and then I think, well, why would that be any different in the city? Because for me, relationships, and I guess I'm looking at I'm looking at relationality and relational practice, relationships with people and country as sort of they're things that that colonization can't sort of take away. The physical spaces can be changed. You can, build a car park on something, or you can, but it's our relationships, I think, that hold our connections together, hold our knowledges together, and hold our, and outline the protocols in which we can share all those knowledges as well. So, those sort of things, I guess, I'm exploring in these urban spaces. I mean, there's a lot of challenges, and don't ever ask anyone doing PhD to kind of talk on it, because I can probably talk on it too much. But yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but I think they're very changed spaces. Only, I think I was reading the other day, only 27% of Aboriginal people actually live on country or have regular access to their own country. So we're all kind of in these melting pots of these urban areas too. So yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, relationships and networks, kinships, connections, these are some of the things that we strengthen when we get together and we talk and we share. And there's some of the things that I think have a lot of potential. They might seem underrated. People ask me what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, well, I just get together and yarn with people. But there's so much in that, and that's so much that can hold as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dom. I was wondering whether we could throw it across to Jacob now, because I know there was quite some interest to see your grain pictures, and maybe to unpack that question a little bit more around to what is the possibilities for amplifying native grains in Australia, and how do people begin to integrate that into their into permaculture design systems or get to know about this kind of thing? And maybe just tell us a little bit more about that that report that that you've just completed as well. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I won't be able to talk much on the report until it's published.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
I can just tell you it's coming.
All right.
We'll have another yarn after it's published. I'll just put some of my things up here. So it just funnily enough, I developed some content for one of the units in the Regen Ag degree, and I put this in there. So this is, and it was on foodways, because I like using that term foodways because it's our own word, and it's been around for a long time, but we've kind of like taken and made it our own in Australia, and it's a way of like articulating the complexity rather than sort of getting tied up in like farmers versus hunter-gatherer. And I think like there's connotations with when you say farming and agriculture, and yeah, I wouldn't call what we were doing farming. I would call it like this. It was like 60,000 years of knowledge accumulated, and in a way to coexist with the landscape and understand it so intimately that you had to do very little to like maintain, like to get a feed out of it. Like you knew what was going to be ready where and when, and how to increase it if need be. Like Dom was talking about the bunya gatherings. Our back homelands, they had native grain gatherings. So like our foodway was native grain. So like mobs come up to Bunya Mountains or Jinnibo country to participate in the Bunya Nut Festival. But we had our own thing too, where mobs from all around would come and participate in that. It went for weeks at a time. And it was a way of like coming together and sharing knowledge and doing trade and working out disputes and working out business, and marriages were organized, and games were like people played all those different types of sports, and big ceremony and celebration, and it went on because we had our grains that could sustain large amounts of people in a sedentary population over weeks at a time. Because imagine everybody coming in, can't just all go and eat a kangaroo or fish out the rivers. You'd have nothing left then. So these grains were sustaining those people. But also going on what Dom was saying too, like, so many people have moved off country. And I did a survey for part of this report that I've written. And I said, like, would you live back on country if there was opportunities with employment or better education opportunities or better like access to healthcare and those kinds of services? And the majority of people said yes. So they've moved off country because there's no opportunity. So I'm saying, like, with our native grain thing, rather than sending it off to the cities to be processed by, inner city sort of people selling it to high-end restaurants and that kind of thing, or high-end bakeries, why can't our mob have something back out on country and be doing something, providing like meaningful employment? Because you put one thing out there, say put a processing facility out there to process our grains, and then from that's one job, but then you start selling the product, and then you got like 300,000 tourists going through these rural communities every year, and they're not stopping because they got no reason to stop. So you give them a reason to stop with native grain bread that's connected to that culture of that place. But I'll show you the photos anyway. Share screen. So you're seeing that?
Yeah.
This is just some grains that you would find on Gamilaroi country. So some in the more sort of eastern districts where it's a bit maybe wetter, and then some from the more northern districts where it's maybe a bit drier, and then native millet, which is just found everywhere. But yeah, these are this is stuff that we could be just on Gamilaroi country sort of talking about and presenting to people and promoting and feeding people and getting these grasses in the ground like they're healing country and because they're so healthy, healing people at the same time. But like the way we can, I guess, maybe support that from the permaculture space is like when this stuff gets on the market, like questioning like, where does this come from? Whose country is this product off? How have you gone about accessing that product? Have you included the local people from that area in selling that product? Because I can tell you, like, at least one of these species is actually on the market now. So which is concerning because I'm not sure how many Gamilaroi people have actually been involved in that process. I know it's come off Gamilaroi country. So I don't know, like, I think, yeah, I don't know how we go up against these massive like systems that oppress or appropriate. Maybe that's something you can tell us. But can you maybe, I'll stop sharing.
Oh yeah, stop sharing.
No.
Yeah,
I figured it out.
Yeah, great. Sorry. I was just about to get ready to do the click. What you've raised there is an enormous question that I want to throw over to Dom at this point, because part of what you're doing is preparing some guidelines for people who are teaching permaculture. And I think this can help to inform how permaculture is shared and to develop and deepen awareness and relationship. Do you want to just speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it's a big problem because I think, I mean, my experiences too, like, it's important, I think, to differentiate permaculture from decolonizing. I think sometimes, when we think, and, permaculture is doing amazing things for country, but sometimes I think, when non-Indigenous peoples and can sort of get in that space of, we're doing this healing work and amazing work, and perhaps forgetting that, it may not be actually decolonizing and it still might be disenfranchising for Aboriginal people. And that could be from, as Jacob was saying, and, Jacob is the authority here on the larger scale. I mean, I'm a backyard kind of space. And, but I think there's power in that too. You know what I mean? What we do with, how we, treat native foods and plants, even in our, little backyards, and even in, our communities, how we're selling them, what we're doing with them. There's definitely a need, I think, for a lot of time, my experiences, permaculture wants to include Indigenous perspectives into, permaculture teaching. But for me, it's important to have the protocols there as well, and how to do it respectfully, and how to, practical ways. And, I'm not the be all and end all, but I am, writing a resource that will hopefully just give voice to some multiple perspectives into this space of how the everyday person, from, the backyard gardener to, people doing small scale ag, can maybe consider a couple of things that might actually be helpful for Aboriginal people, because sometimes we get left out of the equation of what's in it for us, or what's the benefit for our communities and country. And there's definitely things that can be thought about, but I might have to get the resource to find out all the details. But I think it's so vital, because if you're not considering protocols and considering Indigenous peoples and building those relationships and doing things with not just an ethic that is a Western ethic, but an ethic that's centered in our communities, you can be doing a whole lot of damage as well, and disenfranchising Indigenous peoples. So big scale of, what's happening with grains and the commodification of our bushfoods. Bushfood, Tracy can talk to this really strong, like the bushfoods industry currently is, $30 million, and Aboriginal people make up 1% of that. And it's not just it's it's not just being cut out of a money-making market, which is, I guess, important because we've been disenfranchised for 230 years, having our land stolen and, not being able to participate in economies for all that time, stolen wages, stolen children, but it's our cultural knowledges and our cultural property as well. And I think that can be very, so damaging when it gets, taken into these other spaces that don't have the regulation of our cultural integrity with them as well. Hopefully the resource will be finished in June next year. So, yeah.
Fantastic. It's so important. I think, just what you were saying before too, Dom, about opening up yarning circles. I think the possibility for opening up a continuous conversation for people to enter into this space, to start to understand what the issues are. And I think that's probably half of maybe even more than half of the issues, like not understanding what the issues are to even be able to begin to address them. So I think creating the spaces where that can begin to unfold and unpack itself and reweave a different narrative and different set of relationships, I think is possibly a really important place to begin. Tracy, I wonder whether you want to just speak a little bit more about the whole bushfoods takeover, for want of a better word.
Thanks so much, Morag, and thanks, Dom, for raising that. Yeah, it's when was it? About 2019, I think they had their inaugural First Nations Bush Foods Symposium, which was I think there were about 120 First Nations people who worked within the bush foods and botanical space attend that in Sydney, and they came up with an agreement, and I was on the working party that helped establish what's now known as the First Nations Bush Foods and Botanicals Alliance, which has on the board some very strong women who have been working in this space for quite a long time. It's incredibly complex, and as you can well imagine, and there's a lot of things to be considered, but supporting that is great. And one of the things, when you're talking about where the foods come from, etc., and how to identify where it's been sourced from, etc., there has been discussions and just talked about with those, like champagne, those geographical indicators. Terry Jenke also has a lot of resources on looking at that in Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. There's lots of resources there also about frameworks with how you engage within that space. I think from a permaculture perspective though, and like as Dom was mentioning, the underrepresentation within a very lucrative industry is problematic on so many levels, and benefit sharing for the people whose knowledge is that those who are growing the foods and selling them isn't happening, which then further perpetuates colonization and dispossession. So there's a really big opportunity there for people being aware of this and understanding their part in that story. That's a lot of the work that I do. So I do a lot of work with that trauma-informed, culture-informed trauma integrated care and practice process. And I've identified that this is a gap of knowledge within that space, like the impacts of colonization on culinary trauma and nutrition genocide, and even perpetuating today, even though we have land title and, LACs, everyone has to abide by colonial rule to enact these things to happen. So there's a lot of barriers in place. And I think understanding that and respecting your part of the story in that bigger story and how you can change the narrative in that story, I think is a really important thing, and a place where we can actually create a collective consciousness in this space. And it's really, for me, promising that actually, like, we've had how many people? 750 people register for this. I think we're ready. People are ready for doing that. It's not about excluding or anything. It's about growing awareness and understanding how you can support change within this space, because the disparities with our health. That the evidence is there about, if you want to go into that sciencey stuff, my brain goes down many rabbit holes, as you know. If you really want to understand the science of that, like the trauma from colonization and the impacts on that on our health related gaps at the moment, is very closely aligned. So to be able to support and understand that, if you are in permaculture and you are wanting to grow those foods, connect with the knowledge holders on the lands that you are growing those foods, understand the stories, understand the laws and the protocols. When I say laws, it's LORE. Connect and value those, and find out a way that you can give back and benefit share, so you can contribute to that positive change.
Yeah, beautifully said. I wonder whether Jacob or Dom would like to pick up on that, and just as like a way to, as a direction.
Sorry, can I just?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Because I just saw a comment there about Indigenous food sovereignty. Look, I started a PhD in Indigenous food sovereignty. Sovereignty is not a First Nations word. Sovereignty is a colonial word. So to force First Nations peoples with their own individual, governance structures, laws, practices, etc., to force those diversities to fit within one framework of food sovereignty is just perpetuating colonization. I prefer the term, self-determining autonomy and authority, and protecting that Indigenous cultural practice. I hope that answers your question. Amy, I saw that there. I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for noticing those questions. There are a lot of questions that are coming through in there, and I noticed that Jacob, I think you've also been responding to some as well as we're going through. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you whether there was something, before we open up for questions, we've got a bit of time left, if there was something just like what Tracy said, like if you're into permaculture, think about this. Is there something, Jacob or Dom, that you'd like to say directly about that like as a call to action, I suppose?
Yeah, I might just say real quickly, because I know Jacob's probably got a lot to say on that. But one thing about settler colonialism is that it takes up place and space, physically, ideologically. It pushes Indigenous peoples back into history, or pushes Indigenous peoples outside of the, city, or it's a displacing phenomenon, which I think, as people of the colony, that's part of our, collective sort of thinking. So yes, I wanted to say, before jumping into fixing things, I think holding place and space, because we often don't have a good space to talk and to be listened to, because that space just seems to kind of keep getting filled up, in that sort of, both a physical way, with our land, but also in a ideological way, or even in a conversational way, So I think, before you go into sort of even what to do, just stop and listen and think about the space that you're holding. Think about the physical space that you're holding. Oh, whose land am I on? How am I allowing access? How can, traditional owners come and go from this land if they want to? All these things, how am I holding ideological space? Have I got these preconceived ideas about what I think Aboriginal people are or should do, or what Aboriginal food growing is, and all these things. And then how do I hold space in my ability to sort of listen as well? How much space do I have around me to let people talk in? And I love our word in Gamilaroi, winane, which means listen, but it also means respect, understand, know, and in some contexts it means love as well. This is a bigger type of listening that I think is required from us collectively, sharing this space. So yeah, that was just a little 2 cents for me, is just think about the space that you're inhabiting, and how you can hold that space or allow space for other people's perspectives or participation in the land that you're occupying.
I love that word, Dom. I wish we had a word like that in English. Maybe, yeah, we need to make up a word. Jacob, did you want to toss in your thoughts on what you'd like to encourage people to be focusing on, thinking on, taking action on?
Well, a lot of the time, like, if we want to really make change for like First Nations outcomes, it seems it always comes back to land. And I'm not asking you all to repatriate your land, but something that I've also been thinking about is like, people say, oh, it's the European farming practices that destroyed our country, is destroying our country, our ecology, and our the ecosystem functions. But like, you think back into the 1700s, 1800s, European farming practices were actually quite sustainable, and they were very like family orientated. And what we did in Australia was completely different. We started this whole new paradigm where agriculture was used to rapidly colonize the continent and rapidly grow the economy. And that's the same paradigm we still operate under. It's all about grow the economy and keep the land colonized. And people can't do things more sustainably or ecologically minded because they have to do it to get the maximum output, maximum like production output, and the maximum economic output just to hold on to their farm. It's all just about production. And that's what we've been doing since we came in the boats all those years ago. So if we want to do something, I think like start challenging the government on that and saying like, stop pushing people to unrealistic like farming practices. We're going to destroy it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, a lot of people probably know like the story of Walloon Station. Is it Walloon over in WA or something? And they destocked, and then getting all this regeneration back. And then the government was like, I think it was the WA government, they're a bit backward, and they go, we better put cattle back on, or we're going to take your land and give it to somebody else. So if we can start like influencing the government, then maybe it might also influence them to give a bit of land back to First Nations people as well, and not be sort of tied into this idea that we just have to farm the crap out of the land, like to get the biggest outcomes possible. It's like get big or go home kind of thing in Australia. Just want to become like the next America.
Mm.
But, yeah.
Thank you. It's all of you have raised enormous questions, and the point of today was not at all to have necessarily answers, but to open up the conversations, to kind of put those ideas out there into this space of a conversation, so that we start to kind of allow it to seep into our bones and into our elbows and our knees, and understand what some of the issues are. And I'm seeing there's lots of different comments come through, and I'd like to maybe invite people. I know that we've only got about 5 minutes left. I wonder if it's okay to hang around for an extra 5 or so minutes after. Would you all be open to that, just to give us a chance to let people, if you want to put your hand up and ask I was going to say a short and sharp question. I only want to say that because of the time limit, but I don't really want to limit people. But anyway, if you have something particular that you want to ask, please go ahead. Maybe I think it feels to me like there's a space to have further conversations about this. I feel like it's kind of just opening some doors, really. But while people are putting their hand up, there's a little thing down the bottom that says reactions. You can click on that and you can put your hand up. It bumps you up to the top of the screen. I can see that you want to speak. So if you want to do that, while I'm just pointing to a comment here in the chat, which was there was a conversation between Nick and Nicola, actually. And Nick was saying, I don't know how to do permaculture anymore. I don't know how to be properly respectful, or if I'm really qualified to tell anyone how to manage land. And then Nicola responded saying something around, I've stopped teaching for the moment for the same reason. So I wonder whether you have a response to that because of a feeling of not being able to understand what you've all been talking about, to be pulling back and saying, I don't feel like I can advise or teach. Do we want to respond to that? Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
My advice for that would be to, wherever you are, inviting knowledge holders in that space to join you in those teachings. Because, you know, like we can't speak on behalf of any other nations. Can't speak on, like, I don't even speak on behalf of Gamilaroi. Like, that's not my role. My role is to connect people to those knowledge holders so they can teach that, like, to share that. So that would be my advice, is to reach out and work with them, those knowledge holders, to create a more comprehensive content. That's just my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Did either of you else have a response to that, or is there anyone going to be brave and put their hand up? There's no one got their hand up yet. That's all right. I'll scan for some more questions. There was something that came up before, much early on, right at the very beginning of the conversation. It was around the possibilities of this being further into schools. You know, the kids at schools are still getting first fleet stuff. And I know that because my son, who's a 9-year-old, is still getting that. He says, I learned this year after year after year. I'm so over it, he said. And, you know, where do you think are the possibilities within that kind of system for that to, like, is there possibilities of getting First Nations foodways into our schools? And how do you see that already happening possibly?
I take a pretty hard line on those things because I don't necessarily, you know, Australia was founded illegally. It doesn't stack up what happened here in this country in terms of Australian government claiming sovereignty. And so I think what we see is almost like a bit of a Cold War of war of the narrative. That's, you know, it opens up too many cans of worms, you know, if that kind of true story comes to fruition. So partly I think it's never going to really happen because it kind of goes against, you know, some of the more foundational aspects of Australian identity and belonging. You know, also I think there's big, wounds and traumas that are not just happening in our community. And, you know, it seems to, you know, we get the spotlight of, all the trauma that's happened. And yeah, but, you know, that trauma came from another place and came over here. So there was something not quite right over there to come here too. And I think, you know, there's a lot of contention around non-Indigenous people's belonging here. And there's a lot of wounds, I think, that kind of need to be aired and opened up as well. So the long and the short, I mean, in terms of, like, I'm more of a bottom-up sort of person, and I don't necessarily feel all the answers come from top down, and I don't necessarily think the education system is going to come in and be the saviour in this space, but I think it might change and turn as society opens up and changes and turns, and we can, set a different norm and a different standard. I mean, I didn't learn how to do my tax return in school. No one taught me how to do it, but it doesn't mean I didn't have to go out and figure out how to do it, you know. So I think sometimes we should also remember that we also have agency and autonomy outside of what we get fed at school, to sort of, read and educate, you know, our own selves. And for me, it's all about relationships, because even at school, we can learn as much as we want to learn. We can get all the information. I mean, look at what's happening in the environment. We've got all the information. We've got all the facts of the demise of country, but what actually prompts us to have response and have emotion, and it's connection, and it's our sense of, I mean, for Indigenous peoples, like, it's not even where do we stop and country starts? It's not even this is family that we're talking about that's being, destroyed. So it's a different level of accountability and a different level of motivation to response, I think, well far above and beyond just some facts and figures. So I don't know, I'm a bit, again, I teach at university, but I'm skeptical of education systems too. So I just wanted to put that out there. But
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, all the things that you're doing with creating these spaces for conversation. I know there's threads here that we're talking about, you know, kitchen table conversations, what happens around our spaces. I think, sometimes when you start to try and put a curriculum around it, can get kind of challenging. And so,
That curriculum too, sorry, Morag,
No.
needs to be place-based. Like it needs to be engaged with the pedagogies of that country too. You know what I mean? It can't be just sort of rolled out, pan-Aboriginal sort of histories and ways of being in the world. So
yeah, because there is no Australia in that context. So yeah, an Australian curriculum model is not going to work for that. And I can see Amy's got her hand up there. Go ahead, Amy. Do you want to unmute yourself and jump on in?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just check that you can hear that.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much, all. Hi, Tom. I guess I really love leading these sort of sessions on like this is what I can do tomorrow sort of vibe. So that's really the question. Like, what would you guys identify as one thing that any of us on here can do? Tracy, you already touched on that in terms of what you said about engaging with knowledge holders. But I did notice that someone kind of commented back on that, saying sometimes it's really hard. And how do we create those relationships and trust when there's been a lot of, as Nicola said, suspicion and distrust. But the broad question is like, what can I as a person in this country do tomorrow in relation to what we've spoken about?
Can I make one comment to that? Thank you so much, Amy. And I did see that question, and I think the one thing I would recommend doing is first taking a moment to reflect on where your story sits within the bigger story, so you can really understand and empathize with that. And when it's difficult, and I don't mean this to sound like offensive or anything like that, but when it's saying that it's difficult, it's kind of implying that it's coming from the other side, as opposed to understanding maybe it's the story that you sit within that's making it difficult. See what I'm saying? Like, it's about how we approach those things. So I think that, and persist and take patience and practice cultural humility when you're making those, steps to create engagement. Maybe ask, what are you doing? I've really got a great interest. How can I help? As opposed to going, I want to do this. How can you help me meet my agenda? Does that make sense? I'm not implying that anyone's doing that, but it's just being, I think the first step would be to actually understand where your story sits within that bigger one and how you can actually contribute to healing that space.
Thanks, Tracy. Did either Jacob or Dom want to respond to that? Like, what takeaways for what we can hard to summarize in one thing? I know, but
something you can do tomorrow is find something native and plant it in your garden. I don't know, like a lot of people are saying, like I might be disagreed with, but I'm not against people growing native stuff and enjoying native foods. Absolutely not. Like, I'm more against like people trying to profiteer off it, or claiming other people's stories and that kind of thing. But I think every single person in Australia could be growing something that's locally native, and just that itself is you're connecting, and it's not just important for you and your connection, but it's also important for like your local ecology too. Like, we got more invasive feral weeds in Australia now than we do native species. Like, I can drive 8 hours in any direction here and not see a nice native grassland. It's all non-native pasture, and like I don't really see insects that much anymore, not like you used to. And like the foundation of habitats, like keystone species in a lot of ecosystems, are grasses. So plant a grass and make those seed balls and go chuck them around and do that kind of thing. But if you want to go on a bigger level, beyond just your little sort of your space, your backyard, or your safe space, like I always tell people to start like building connections, like envisioning like what do you want to see in like generations time, and what's that big vision that you can't possibly achieve, and then what's one sort of challenge that you can do that could help address that thing. And then from that challenge, there's a whole bunch of things that you're going to have to do to address just that one thing. but within all of those things you've got to do, that maybe there's a place for you and your group of friends or peers or your network to start trying to influence or do something positive that can address a challenge that in several generations can help achieve this bigger vision. I don't know. There's a lot to try to articulate in really quickly.
Thanks, Jacob. Dom, did you want to add any what to do tomorrow thoughts?
Just get up, have a good breakfast, hug your family. And on top of that, I'm going to pinch, I heard, really amazing artist and academic Jonathan Jones, he's Gamilaroi and Wiradjuri man. Heard him speak one time and he got asked the same question actually. And he just said, just fall in love with your country. Do you know what I mean? Like fall in love with it, the way as Aboriginal people, we love our country as extensions of ourselves. And, you know, I think as holders of our knowledge, as holders of our identity, all things. And I think the relationship, the positioning kind of shifts. And, you know, and I think if you fall in love with your country as well, you'll understand that the country only is because it's grown with our old people for 120,000 years. So the country only is because of how we've been on this country. So I think, you know, maybe that's a good place to start in terms of building that love and understanding, because when we love something, we respect it. We don't treat it badly. We love it. We care for it. So, and there's many different ways to care for things, but yeah, at least starting there, I think, because it is hard work. You know, it's work of the head and the science work, but I really think it's the work of the heart as well.
Thank you, Amy, for bringing in such a nice grounding question to bring us all to a kind of a point where we feel like there's something that you can really tangibly go forward and do. I wonder whether, you know, in the chat, there's lots of people starting to say thank you and I love what's going on. I wonder if there's something that you could drop in the chat about what you've heard in this session that you think that has landed with you that you'd like to take away with you, or possibly even further questions that you're holding that you'd like to follow up and ask further. And I also did just want to let you know that if you did want to copy the chat, if there was something there, there's 3 dots in the bottom there where you type. And if you press on that, you can click on it and it says save chat. So if you wanted to save the chat, you can do that there and read what other people have said. So yeah, if you could just drop that in there, that would be fantastic. And I wondered, Dom, Jacob, or Tracy, whether there was anything that you wanted to let people know that they could do to follow up these conversations in a way that integrates with what you're doing. I know, Dom, you've got an event that's coming up soon, or anything like that, or any websites that people could go to that they could follow up the kind of work that you're doing. If you wanted to drop those into the chat too, or let us know now.
I actually run, I'm going to be launching some workshops with connection to the culturally informed trauma integrated care space, particularly focusing on our foods and food systems. Something I'd like to quote is something that Uncle Bruce Pascoe he said once, he's like, you can't eat our food if you can't swallow our history. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just like, I actually look at that when he says that going, I think we can eat better when we do actually understand the history of it. We can do more healing when we are with that. I like to look at it as a positive lens. I'm an optimist. So I'll put in the link, my website, but if you want to join there and join a newsletter, I'll keep everyone updated when those are going to happen and where.
Thank you, Tracy. Fantastic.
You go, Jeff. You go, Jacob.
No, it's just a lot of people asking about native grasses, and this is a thing we don't really have anywhere that people can go. So this is the work that I'm working on at the moment, is developing an entity that can be that place where the two cultures can come together, that safe place. And And yes, so I don't have anything to share, but watch this space, keep your eyes open. And the native grains, I guess you're going to have to find them yourself, because who can afford $1,000 a kilo? Go out and find some, and do it really like gently and purposefully, because they are so rare now. They're so hard to find. Like kangaroo grass you'll probably find, but I found some weeping grass locally, which I was stoked about, because they're quite hard to find in some areas.
That's great. Yeah. I was super excited when I found some kangaroo grass just down the bottom of my block down here, and I'm trying to help it to kind of expand out. I'd love to, take that whole area throughout the common spaces at Crystal Waters here and start to expand that out. That'd be amazing. Thanks, Jacob. Dom, did you want to share? Oh, we were going to ask you a little bit about if there was anything else you wanted to say about the PDC that you were thinking of designing.
Yeah, so I got too much on, probably too much to say. I've got a little e-news that I send out just with things that I'm doing, trying to involve community as much as possible. So I put that in the chat. You can sign up to that. I don't spam people too much, just every couple of months. So I've got a bit on, and just thank you so much, Governor, for all that money that was raised today. So I'm in the process of starting up a not-for-profit, and that not-for-profit is going to be just geared around supporting and building capacity for urban Aboriginal food and medicine growing stuff. So part of that, part of that, the money's going to go there straight to that not-for-profit, and eventually, once I'm going to do this like protocols and perspectives, kind of micro sort of credential to go with permaculture design courses. So I'm hoping that will raise a little, because that's going to be subscription, and we'll raise a little bit of money for that too. So once we get a little bit of money there, we're going to start developing and implementing. Like, I mean, I don't know if I want to call it a permaculture design course for mob, but it might be a cultural design, garden design course, but a culturally centered and a culturally informed, learning space for urban Aboriginal mob to be able to apply, all of the many, many beautiful cultural knowledges and practices into these urban spaces. And drawing upon, permaculture is permaculture is great because it does give that kind of framework for these change spaces, So that's that. I've probably missed something, but it's all happening. Follow the newsletter, and then you can kind of keep up to date with how all that's progressing. And also just down the way, just near you, Morag, the plan is to turn that little block of land into a sort of like a plant library or a seed library. So I'm going to plan it out with bushfoods and have it as a space where mob can just come and take seeds, cuttings, resources, proper ways, sharing stories, sharing protocols. But I'm not all for mob having to pay hundreds of dollars for our customary foods. So hopefully that can be a good space in the future as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, Tracy, go ahead. Yep.
Can I just add, I've noticed within the chat, I know quite a few people in that chat who are actually very good knowledge holders. Kalia, Priscilla, just to name a few. If you guys want to share your details of where people can contact you as well, like being aware to, as a group, the cultural load that comes with this. There's not many, like just being aware of that and being patient with feedback, and also doing some of your own research as well within that space. There's lots of information out there. Just being gentle, and it's a two-way thing. Like, we're here to help, but just being gentle. But so anyone who's in the space, I know I've seen a few names there. If you want to share where you are, that would be great.
Thanks, Tracy. And really, really great point too about that two-way street. And look, I know it's getting late for you all, and I know you've all had enormously busy days. I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing this yarn and being part of this, opening up this conversation and responding so generously to the questions and the comments and the thoughts, and offering some steps forward, how people can start to become more aware and more responsive in this space. And, I would love to see if we can find a way to carry on these sorts of conversations. I wonder if maybe you could offer me some advice about how to continue this. What would you think would be some next steps for us to be able to do this?
We might have to get back to you on that, Morag. Give us some time.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I don't expect an answer now, but I would love some.
But you know what? I'm just going to leave with everybody too. Like, the thing is to consider is, if you don't make this change, what's the consequence of not making any changes? Any step towards positive change is a step forward in our ways. Yes, there might be mistakes. There might be things that you stumble across. You might get a growling at, but that's okay. It's part of the learning process. I get growled at. We all do. It's part of it. That's okay. But we all need to work together to make this change. So thank you for everyone for participating.
When people growl at you, that means that they think you're got some potential. I'd be more worried if people don't even growl you.
I know there's a couple of people on here. I'm like, oh, I hope they're not going to growl at me.
But that's a really good point, and I think, just to emphasize that we're only just three, people talking, and we happen to all be from the same amazing country. But, there's multiple voices and perspectives in these spaces, and listen to all of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't just listen to the ones that are on the podcasts and the videos and writing the books. Like, listen to the people, listen to the aunties and the uncles first and foremost that are on the ground and in community. That's where you should be listening, probably more than us. So,
yeah, thank you. Any final words, or is that a wrap? Do you think that's a wrap? All right. Well, thank you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight. And I know that the chat has been so full of appreciation for your time to be sharing here with us today. I will make this recording available to the people who weren't able to join us today. And if it's at all useful for anyone to share, if you are okay with that too, to share out this conversation so that other people can listen and be open to, the ideas that we've explored here.
One thing I'll leave it on here. So the First Nations Bushfoods and Botanical Alliance were meant to have a conference in October this year. It's been moved to April next year. Hop online and look at that, because it's going to have people speaking from all over representing it, that you might gain some more knowledge from vast amount of people.
Can you just say that again? What was it?
The First Nations Bushfoods and Botanical Alliance. They have
that's the link that you'd put in before.
Yeah, I got the link in there. So have a look at that and keep abreast of that.
So someone just asked whether I can summarize all the contacts. So yes, when I send out the recording, everyone who's here and who missed it will get the recording plus the summary of those contacts that you've shared. So just to say that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, check it. Yeah.
Was that the one in Alice Springs, Tracy?
Yeah, it was meant to happen in October, but it's been moved to April next year.
Yeah. So I think I'm talking at that on the grains. So our roadmap will be published by then. So I'll be talking about that, and hopefully also have this entity, like some kind of entity out there that we can sort of start promoting. I don't know. See how we go.
I'll be talking there too, brother.
Was that?
I'll be talking there too. We just need Dom on the train and we'll be all covered.
It'd be cool.
Thank you, everyone.
And just wanted to say, Morag, thank you so much for bringing us all together. We've been yarning over Zoom and over email for like years and years, us three. So it's just awesome to kind of finally get together with these very, very deadly people and yourself. So yeah, thank you, Morag. Really, really appreciate all of your support and holding this space for us.
Yeah, thank you for coming along, and thank you everyone who's here for coming along too.
Thanks, Morag.
Have a great evening, day, morning, wherever you are in the world, and we'll catch you all again soon, I hope. Okay, bye.